The fist connected before anyone saw it coming. One moment, Private Grace Thornton stood on the combat training mat, hands raised in a defensive posture that fooled no one who knew what to look for. Sweat cut lines through the Arizona dust caking her face, turning her skin into a map of exhaustion and endurance. The morning sun had already pushed the temperature past 90 degrees, and the air shimmered with heat rising from the desert floor. The next moment, Master Sergeant Victor Hale's knuckles crashed into her jaw with the full rotational force of 220 pounds of muscle memory. 3 decades of close-quarters combat training compressed into a single, devastating strike. This was not a controlled demonstration. This was not a training tap designed to teach proper blocking technique. This was a real punch. The kind designed to break bones and end fights. The kind that came from a place of cold, calculated violence rather than instructional necessity. Grace's head snapped sideways with a crack that echoed across the silent training ground. Blood exploded from her split lip, bright red drops scattering across the pale dirt like paint splattered on canvas. Her legs went liquid beneath her, all the strength draining out in an instant. She dropped hard. Her shoulder blades hit the ground with a sound like a sack of grain thrown from a truck bed. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent stars cascading across her vision. 37 recruits standing in formation around the mat went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that happens when something fundamentally wrong occurs and everyone's brain is still trying to process what their eyes just witnessed. No one moved, no one breathed. They just stood there, frozen in the morning heat, watching their drill instructor stand over a fallen recruit with his fists still clenched. Hale stood over her, chest heaving, that thick vein in his neck pulsing like a trapped snake beneath the weathered skin. His shadow fell across her face, blocking out the punishing Arizona sun. He was waiting, waiting for her to cry, waiting for her to beg, waiting for her to curl into a ball like every other recruit who found themselves on the wrong end of his attention. His boots were 6 inches from her face. She could smell the leather polish, see the microscopic cracks in the black surface where the desert had worked its way into the material. She could count the grains of red dirt clinging to the rubber soles. But Private Grace Thornton did not cry. She lay there for exactly 3 seconds, her eyes clear and almost calculating despite the blood running down her chin. And beneath her uniform, against the skin near her left rib cage, a sensor no bigger than a grain of rice detected the sudden spike in her cortisol levels. It registered the rapid elevation of her heart rate, the specific biomarkers that indicated extreme physical trauma. That tiny piece of technology, invisible to everyone standing on that scorching parade deck, began transmitting a signal. Not a normal emergency alert. Not a standard medical distress call. This was an Omega Red priority code. The kind of signal that bypassed every level of military bureaucracy and lit up screens in places most soldiers did not know existed. What Sergeant Hale did not know, what nobody standing on that training ground could have possibly known, was that he had not just punched a farm girl from Ohio who could not quite hack infantry training. He had just triggered a protocol reserved for threats to national security assets. He thought he was teaching a lesson in humility. He thought he was breaking another weak recruit who would wash out and disappear back to civilian life. He thought he was doing what he had done for 23 years without consequence. He was actually 7 minutes away from having his entire career dissected, burned, and buried by people who wore badges instead of uniforms. People whose authority superseded the chain of command. People who were already moving, already loading into vehicles, already calculating fastest routes across the desert. But to understand why Victor Hale threw that punch, why he put everything behind it with the clear intention of doing permanent damage, you have to rewind the clock. You have to go back 10 weeks. Back to a Tuesday in June when a woman who was not Grace Thornton walked into Fort Morrison for the first time, carrying a lie that would eventually bring down not just one sergeant, but an entire network of corruption that had been rotting the base from the inside for years. 10 weeks earlier, the Pentagon smelled like floor wax and filtered air. Every important decision in modern warfare got made in buildings where the windows did not open and sunlight had to ask permission to enter. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with identical doors leading to identical offices where men and women in uniform pushed papers and shape the fate of nations one memo at a time. Captain Nora Callahan sat in a conference room on the third sublevel, the kind of room that did not appear on any official floor plan. No windows, no natural light, just harsh fluorescent tubes humming overhead and walls painted the same bureaucratic gray as every other classified space in the building. She was 29 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the kind of eyes that noticed everything while revealing nothing. Her service uniform fit perfectly, every crease sharp, every ribbon aligned. She had spent 7 years building a reputation as one of the Defense Intelligence Agency's most meticulous analysts, the kind of officer who caught patterns others missed, the kind who could look at 1,000 data points and see the single thread that tied them all together. Right now, she was watching a slideshow that made her stomach turn. 43 faces filled the screen, one after another, all young, all discharged from Fort Morrison Infantry Training Center in the past 18 months. Medical discharges, psychological discharges, administrative separations. The official paperwork was clean and professional, stamped with the appropriate signatures from military doctors and commanding officers who had signed off on each case without asking too many questions. But when you laid all 43 cases side by side, when you looked at the pattern instead of the individual pixels, you saw something else entirely. You saw teeth marks, predator behavior. The DIA director sat at the head of the table. Robert Kane was a compact man in his late 50s, with steel gray hair cut military short and eyes that had stopped being impressed by anything around the time the Berlin Wall fell. He had spent 3 decades in intelligence work, and his face had settled into a permanent expression of weary vigilance. 340% above the national average for training discharges, Kane said, clicking to a slide showing the statistical breakdown. And that's just the ones who made it into the official statistics. We estimate another dozen washed out without generating paperwork. Just disappeared back to civilian life without filing complaints or seeking treatment. Nora studied the faces on the screen. Boys, really, 19, 20 years old. The average age of an infantry trainee. Some looked shell-shocked in their identification photos, like they had already seen combat before they ever touched a rifle. Others had that 1,000-yard stare that usually took a deployment to develop. "What's the common denominator?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Kane clicked to the next slide. One face filled the screen, older, harder, with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that looked through you instead of at you. The face of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of controlled violence. Sergeant First Class Victor Hale, Desert Storm veteran, Silver Star recipient. 23 years of service across 4 combat deployments. He's been the senior drill instructor at Fort Morrison for the past 18 months. Kane paused, letting the implications settle. Every single one of these discharges came from his training cycles. Nora leaned forward in her chair. And nobody's done anything? The base commander is a colonel named Whitmore. Good officer once, but he's 6 months from retirement. Doesn't want waves. Wants to finish his 30 years with his pension intact and his record clean. Kane's voice carried the particular contempt of someone who had seen too many good systems corrupted by comfortable leadership. The few complaints that made it up the chain got buried with character assessments that painted the recruits as weak, unsuitable for service. Hale's got a reputation in certain circles. Old Army, hard but fair. His graduation numbers are actually good, the ones who make it through, the ones who survive him. Exactly. Kane clicked again. This time the screen showed a map of Afghanistan, specifically a valley in Kunar province, deep in the mountains along the Pakistani border. Red X marks indicated positions, 4 of them, clustered around a narrow road that wound through terrain perfect for ambush. August 12th, Kane continued, 4 National Guard soldiers on a logistics convoy took a wrong turn in a supposedly secure area. Taliban ambush. All 4 killed before the quick reaction force could respond. 2 of them were married. One had a baby daughter he'd never met. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. The intel said that route was safe. Someone told the Taliban exactly where that convoy would be and when. Someone with access to classified patrol schedules and convoy timing. Nora's throat went tight. You think Hale leaked it? We know he's been in contact with members of the Watchmen of Liberty, domestic extremist group with white nationalist ties, phone records, encrypted messaging apps, financial transfers we're still tracing. Kane's face remained impassive, but his voice carried an edge of cold fury. We've been monitoring him for 6 months, but we can't prove the Afghanistan leak came from him. Not yet. Not with enough evidence to prosecute. He clicked again. A schematic of Fort Morrison appeared on the screen. Hundreds of buildings spread across the Arizona high desert. Training ranges, barracks, administrative facilities. A small city dedicated to transforming civilians into soldiers. We need someone inside, someone who can document the abuse patterns, build testimony for the training violations prosecution. Nora nodded slowly. But that's not really why I'm here. No. Kane met her eyes directly for the first time since the briefing began. We need someone who can get close enough to his computer systems, his communications, someone who can find the evidence that connects him to those 4 dead soldiers. Someone who can close this case before more American service members die because of his treason. You want me to go undercover? It was not a question. Nora kept her voice flat, professional, gave away nothing of the sudden acceleration in her pulse. You're a strategic intelligence analyst. You've never done field work. You don't have the operator smell that Hale would detect from a mile away. Kane slid a folder across the polished table. You're perfect precisely because you're not trained for this. Nora opened the folder. The woman staring back at her from the identification photo looked like a different person entirely. Plain features, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes that suggested someone who had spent more time with livestock than people. Unremarkable in every way that mattered. Grace Thornton, farm girl from rural Ohio, 1 year of community college, dropped out to help with the family farm when her father's back gave out. Decided to enlist because she needed purpose, needed direction, needed something bigger than 40 acres of corn and soybeans outside a town called Perryville. Population 800. Unremarkable academics. Decent physical fitness. No red flags. The entire backstory was there in meticulous detail. Parents, schooling, employment history, even a manufactured social media presence going back 5 years. Posts about harvest seasons and county fairs, and a golden retriever named Biscuit who had died last spring. The Defense Intelligence Agency had built a human being out of whole cloth. What's the timeline? Nora asked. 12 weeks. That's a full infantry training cycle. You document everything. We'll have a handler on base monitoring you through an implanted biosensor. Kane's expression did not change, but his voice dropped half an octave. The moment you're in real danger, we extract you. He paused, and in that pause, Nora could hear the weight of everything he was not saying. But Captain, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about catching one abusive drill sergeant. 4 American soldiers are dead because someone sold them out. If Hale is working with domestic terrorists, if there are others in his network, we need to know before more people die. We need evidence that will hold up in a military tribunal and send a message that treason still carries consequences. Nora looked at the faces again. 43 discharged recruits staring back from the screen. 4 dead soldiers in a valley half a world away. Young men who had trusted their country to protect them and been betrayed by someone wearing the same uniform. She thought about her younger sister, Amanda, 22 years old, discharged from basic training in 2018 after a drill instructor at Fort Leonard Wood systematically destroyed her self-confidence over 10 weeks. Amanda, who now worked night shifts at a gas station outside Columbus, who drank too much, who could not hold down relationships because the uniform had broken something essential inside her before she ever got the chance to serve. The military had failed Amanda, failed to protect her from a predator in a position of authority, failed to hold anyone accountable, failed to even acknowledge that what happened to her was wrong. Nora had watched her little sister spiral for 5 years, had sat through the tearful phone calls at 2 in the morning, had driven 6 hours to drag Amanda out of a bar when she stopped answering texts for 3 days, had wondered every single time if there was anything she could have done differently, anything that might have prevented the destruction of someone she loved. Now she had a chance to stop the next Victor Hale, to protect the next Amanda, to make sure that 43 broken recruits did not become 44, 50, 100. When do I ship out? She asked. Kane smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. You're already late for in-processing. Fort Morrison sprawled across 15,000 acres of high desert scrubland where the temperature hit 110 degrees by mid-afternoon, and the only shade came from buildings painted the same beige as the landscape. The base existed in a permanent state of heat and dust, the kind of place where even the tumbleweeds looked exhausted. The civilian bus dropped 38 recruits at the main gate on a Tuesday morning in mid-June. The sun was barely 2 hours above the horizon, and already the air felt like an oven preheating for the day's assault. From the moment their boots hit the pavement, they belonged to the Army. In-processing was designed to strip away civilian identity with assembly line efficiency. Haircuts that left skulls visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. Uniforms that fit like cardboard boxes, sized for nobody and everybody at once. Shouted instructions from processing sergeants who did not care about names, only about moving bodies through the pipeline fast enough to meet quotas. Nora let herself be swept along in the current. She kept her eyes down, her mouth shut, her movements just clumsy enough to seem authentic. Every stumble was calculated, every moment of confusion was performed. She was becoming Grace Thornton with each passing minute, burying Captain Nora Callahan deeper beneath layers of manufactured mediocrity. The barracks smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. 60 bunks filled one long room, metal frames with thin mattresses that had molded themselves to the shape of thousands of previous bodies. The springs creaked with every movement, and the concrete floor held the cold despite the heat outside. Nora took a middle bunk, not too close to the drill sergeant area where extra attention fell on those deemed problematic. Not so far back that she would draw suspicion for hiding. Just another recruit trying to survive the next 12 weeks. Within 30 minutes, she had her gear stowed and her bunk made to the loose approximation of standard that suggested someone who tried to follow the diagram but did not quite understand the physics of hospital corners. Good enough to avoid punishment, sloppy enough to be forgettable, the recruit in the next bunk was unpacking with the kind of careful precision that spoke to years of farm work. 18, maybe 19, with blonde hair buzzed down to stubble, and the kind of hands that knew manual labor intimately. Every item went into its designated place with methodical attention. She caught Nora watching and offered a shy smile that transformed her whole face from guarded to genuine. Megan Holloway, Montana. Grace Thornton, Ohio. The lie came smooth, practiced 100 times in front of mirrors, until Nora Callahan could disappear completely and this other person could step forward fully formed. Farm girl too? Ranch, cattle mostly, corn and soybeans, some livestock. Nora had memorized every detail of her backstory until it felt like genuine memory. She could describe the layout of the Thornton farm, the equipment they used, the neighbors who brought casseroles when her fictional father threw out his back. First time away from home? Megan nodded and something vulnerable flickered across her face, the kind of expression that made Nora's chest tighten with recognition. It was the look of someone running from something, someone hoping the uniform would provide protection from a civilian life that had stopped being safe. Before Nora could respond, a voice like a chainsaw cutting sheet metal ripped through the barracks. On your feet! 3 drill sergeants entered in wedge formation, their boots striking the concrete floor in perfect unison. The sound echoed off the walls like gunshots, and 38 recruits scrambled to stand at attention beside their bunks. The one in front was average height but built like a fire hydrant, all compressed muscle and contained violence, wrapped in a uniform so perfectly pressed it looked like it would crack if he bent too far. Campaign ribbons covered his left breast, a silver star prominent among them. His face was weathered leather, creased by decades of sun and wind and the particular stress of combat. His eyes were the color of old ice, and his jaw was set in a permanent clench that suggested he had forgotten how to relax it years ago. Sergeant First Class Victor Hale. Nora had studied his file until she could recite it in her sleep. Born 1972 in a small town outside Memphis. Enlisted in 1991 at 17 years old with parental consent. Deployed to Desert Storm during the final weeks of ground combat. Panama before that. Grenada. Every conflict where America had sent infantry to do the bleeding. Married once to a woman named Maria, who had loved him before the war changed him. Divorced in 2005, 1 year after their son Ryan was killed in Fallujah. No remarriage, no serious relationships documented since. Just 23 years of making soldiers, breaking the ones who did not measure up, and somehow never quite crossing the line far enough to face consequences. Until now. He walked down the center aisle between bunks, each step deliberate, boots hitting the floor like hammers driving nails. The other two drill sergeants flanked him, younger men with eyes that tracked movement like gun turrets searching for targets. When Hale reached the center of the barracks, he stopped, rotated slowly, took in every face with the patient evaluation of a predator surveying potential prey. Listen up, because I'm only saying this once. The voice matched the face, ground down by years of screaming into wind and dust and the roar of combat. It carried without effort, filling every corner of the barracks, leaving no space for anything else. I am Sergeant First Class Hale. For the next 12 weeks, I own you. Your body belongs to me. Your time belongs to me. Your sleep, your meals, your thoughts, all mine. You signed a contract that gave me permission to turn you from soft civilian garbage into something that might, if we're lucky, survive 5 minutes in actual combat. He paused, letting the words settle like fallout after a blast. Most of you won't make it. You'll quit. You'll get injured. You'll wash out because you realize you bit off more than your soft little mouths can chew. That's fine. Better you fail here than get real soldiers killed downrange. His gaze swept the room like a searchlight. But for those of you who do make it, you'll walk out of here with something you've never had before. Standards, discipline, the knowledge that you can push through pain that would make your civilian selves curl up and die. Hale started walking again, slower now, studying faces like a collector examining specimens. He stopped in front of a heavy-set kid whose uniform strained at the buttons, a kid who was trying very hard to control his breathing. You look soft. You gonna quit on me? No, Sergeant. We'll see. He moved on, pausing at a tall recruit who carried himself with the unconscious arrogance of a high school athlete who had never been told he was not special. You think you're tough? Yes, Sergeant. Wrong answer. You don't know what tough is yet. I'm going to show you. Then he was standing in front of Nora. She kept her eyes forward, not meeting his gaze, exactly as the in-processing sergeants had instructed. But she could feel him looking at her, not a glance, a study, like he was performing some kind of internal assessment, running calculations that had nothing to do with her potential as a soldier. Farm girl, he said. It was not a question. Yes, Sergeant. Keep the voice neutral. Small-town Ohio accent, slight uptick at the ends of sentences, suggesting uncertainty rather than confidence. Not weak, but not strong either. Invisible. Let me see your hands. Nora held them out, palms up. She had spent 2 weeks working construction before shipping out, deliberately building calluses and getting dirt under her nails that would not wash out completely. The hands of someone who knew physical labor. But Hale took her right hand, turned it over, and studied the palm with the intensity of someone reading a medical chart. His grip was firm without being painful, clinical rather than aggressive. Soft, he said finally. You got soft hands for someone who claims they work a farm. The biosensor under her ribs registered a spike in her heart rate. 14 other people in the room, and Hale had gone straight to the one person who was lying. Coincidence? Instinct? Or had he already been briefed somehow that someone unusual was in his platoon? Winter's been slow, Sergeant, Nora said, maintaining the character despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Haven't had much field work lately. Hale held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary. 3 seconds that stretched out like hours. Then he released her hand and moved on without another word. First formation is at 0500 hours. That's 5 in the morning for those of you who can't tell military time yet. You will be outside in uniform, boots laced, ready to begin the process of becoming soldiers. Anyone who's late will regret existing. He paused at the door, turned back one final time. Dismissed. The drill sergeants filed out, and the moment the door closed, the barracks erupted in the nervous chatter of recruits introducing themselves, comparing backgrounds. trying to build alliances that might help them survive what was coming. Megan leaned toward Nora, her voice barely above a whisper. He's intense. Yeah. Nora lay back on her bunk, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles. Through the thin fabric of her uniform, she could feel the biosensor like a tiny heartbeat against her ribs. Right now, 3 miles away in the Tactical Operations Center, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Thorne was monitoring her vital signs, making sure the implant was functioning correctly. By tomorrow, they would establish a pattern: normal heart rate, normal stress responses during physical training, baseline readings that would let them identify when something was genuinely wrong versus when she was simply enduring the expected hardships of basic training. If hail hurt her badly enough, if the danger became acute, Thorne would activate the extraction protocol. Tactical teams would spin up, vehicles would race across the desert. She would be pulled out before permanent damage could be done. But for now, she was Private Grace Thornton, farm girl from Ohio. Unremarkable, forgettable, invisible, exactly the way she needed to be. The first week was designed to break bodies and spirits simultaneously. 0-500 formation every morning before the sun turned the Arizona desert into a convection oven. Physical training until recruits vomited, then more physical training after they finished vomiting. Classroom instruction on military law, customs, and courtesies. The Uniform Code of Military Justice explained in excruciating detail. Drill and ceremony until every movement became muscle memory. Until 38 individuals moved like a single organism responding to shouted commands. And through it all, Hale watched. He had a gift for identifying weakness, not just physical limitations. Anyone could spot the overweight kid struggling with push-ups or the skinny kid who could not do a pull-up to save his life. Hale found psychological fault lines with the precision of a geologist identifying fractures in bedrock. The recruit who flinched when voices got loud received extra attention at maximum volume. The one who seemed cocky got publicly humiliated until the arrogance shattered into something more malleable. The religious kid who kept a small Bible in his footlocker found himself on fire guard duty every night for a week. Sleep deprivation breaking down his faith one exhausted prayer at a time. Nora performed exactly average in everything. 37 out of 40 on the rifle familiarization quiz, passing but unremarkable. Physical fitness test scores that hovered right at the threshold between acceptable and needs improvement. Not good enough to stand out as talented. Not bad enough to attract corrective attention. She was vanilla, background noise. The kind of soldier who graduated and got sent to a logistics unit where her mediocrity would never endanger anyone. But Megan Holloway drew Hale's attention like blood drew sharks. It started small. Megan had this tiny flinch whenever someone moved too quickly in her peripheral vision. A startled response that most people would never notice. The kind of reaction that got programmed into the nervous system by years of living with unpredictable violence. Nora noticed it the second day. Hale noticed it the third. And once he noticed, he started testing it. Walking past Megan fast during formation, close enough that she could feel the air displacement, slamming his hand on the table during classroom instruction and watching her jump. Standing behind her during meals, just outside her field of vision, until the tension in her shoulders became visible from across the room. He never acknowledged it directly, never explained why, just conditioning her to live in a state of constant vigilance, constant anticipation of the blow that might come at any moment. By the end of week 2, Megan was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. Nora could hear her crying softly after lights out, those suppressed sounds people make when they are trying desperately not to let anyone know they are breaking. "You okay?" Nora whispered one night, when the crying had gone on longer than usual. "I'm fine." Megan's voice was small in the darkness. "Just, my dad used to move like that. Fast. Before he—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. "Hale's just testing you," Nora said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "Seeing if you'll quit. Don't give him the satisfaction." "I won't." But Megan's voice had the quality of someone making a promise they were not sure they could keep. Nora stared at the ceiling, listening to 37 other people breathing in the dark. 3 miles away, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne was monitoring her biosensor, making sure she stayed safe. But there was no sensor for Megan, no extraction protocol. Just a 19-year-old girl from Montana trying to escape an abusive father by joining an organization that had handed her directly to an abusive drill sergeant. The math was simple and cruel. Document the abuse. Gather evidence. Let it continue long enough to build a prosecutable case, even if that meant watching people suffer. Even if it meant becoming complicit through inaction. This was the job. Captain Nora Callahan understood the mission parameters with perfect clarity, but Private Grace Thornton, the person she was pretending to be, the person Megan thought was her friend, that person would not stand by and watch someone get destroyed. The contradiction was going to be a problem. Week 4 brought weapons training and night operations, and with it Nora's first real opportunity to gather intelligence. The rifle ranges sat at the far edge of the base, separated from the main training area by half a mile of desert scrub. During the day, the crack of M4 carbines echoed off the distant mountains like sporadic thunderstorms. At night, the ranges went dark and quiet, maintained by a skeleton crew of support personnel who had better things to do than patrol empty buildings. Hale kept his office in the drill sergeant compound, a small building adjacent to the main barracks where the permanent party instructors handled administrative work. Nora had studied the layout during her infiltration briefing. Single-story structure, 4 offices, shared computer terminal in a common area. The computers were connected to Fort Morrison's classified network. If Hale was communicating with domestic extremist groups, if he was accessing classified information he should not have, the evidence would be there. Getting to those computers required missing a bed check, crossing 300 yards of open ground, bypassing whatever minimal security existed, and returning before anyone noticed her absence. It required luck, timing, and skills that farm girls from Ohio should not possess. Nora volunteered for fire guard duty, 2-hour shifts watching the barracks, making sure nobody died in a fire or did something stupid in a moment of despair. The 4 to 6 shift in the morning was perfect. The drill sergeants changed shifts at 05:30, 30 minutes of overlap, where the night crew was tired and the morning crew was still caffeinating. She waited until 04:45. The drill sergeant on duty, a staff sergeant named Miller, was in his office doing paperwork. Nora slipped out the side door and moved fast and low across the open ground between buildings. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute. No moon, just stars scattered across the sky like buckshot on black velvet. Her boots made almost no sound on the packed dirt. Her breathing stayed controlled despite the adrenaline. The drill sergeant compound had lights on inside, but the windows were covered with blinds. Nora circled to the back, found a window cracked open for ventilation. Arizona nights cooled down enough that the buildings became stuffy without airflow. She paused, listening. Voices inside. 2 drill sergeants complaining about coffee quality, discussing the upcoming training schedule. No sound from the computer area. She checked the window frame. Standard military construction. Metal frame with a simple latch. Nora pulled a small tool from her pocket, something she had smuggled past in processing hidden inside a tampon, and worked the latch free in under 10 seconds. The window swung open soundlessly, well-maintained hinges that made no protest. Nora pulled herself through and dropped into a storage closet filled with training equipment. She stayed low, controlled her breathing, listened. The voices were coming from the break room, 40 feet away and around a corner. The computer terminal sat in the common area between her position and theirs. She moved like smoke. Every lesson from her abbreviated intelligence training at DIA came flooding back. The way to distribute weight to minimize sound, how to stay in shadows, the pattern of movement that the human eye had the hardest time detecting. The computer was already on, logged into a shared administrative account. Sloppy security, but typical of military installations, where convenience usually won the battle against proper protocols. Nora pulled a USB drive from another hiding place, this one concealed in the seam of her belt. DIA's tech unit had designed it to look like a simple flash drive, but the moment she inserted it into the port, it began running automated scripts that would copy every file, every email, every bit of cached data without leaving obvious traces. The download progress bar appeared. 3 minutes estimated, 3 minutes sitting exposed in the middle of a room while two drill sergeants drank coffee 20 yards away. Nora's heart rate climbed. The biosensor under her ribs would be transmitting that spike. 3 miles away, Thorne would see it. But unless she was in immediate physical danger, he would not extract her. This was the mission. This was why she was here. 2 minutes remaining. One of the voices in the break room got louder. Someone telling a story about a recruit who had tried to smuggle contraband during in-processing. Laughter. The sound of a chair scraping. 1 minute. The progress bar crawled forward like it was moving through molasses. Nora kept her hand on the USB drive, ready to yank it out and run if necessary. Her other hand rested on the mouse, cursor positioned to close the window instantly. Footsteps. Coming toward the common area. 30 seconds. The progress bar hit 90%, 95, 98. A shadow appeared at the edge of the doorway. Nora went absolutely still. Every muscle locked. Not even breathing. The shadow paused. Whoever was attached to it was standing just out of sight, maybe 5 feet away, doing something she could not see. 100%. The USB drive gave a nearly inaudible click as the data transfer completed. Nora pulled it free, pocketed it in one smooth motion, closed the window on screen. The shadow started moving again, stepping into the common area. Command Sergeant Major William Brennan was 67 years old if he was a day, with the kind of face that suggested he had been present at every major American conflict since Korea. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had been putting it on for longer than most people had been alive, and his eyes, pale blue and sharp as surgical steel, tracked to Nora's position with the inevitability of a targeting system locking on. "Private," he said. His voice was surprisingly gentle, like worn leather. "You're not supposed to be here." Nora stood slowly, came to attention. Her mind raced through possible explanations, discarding each one as fast as it formed. Fire guard duty, got lost looking for the latrine. Sleepwalking, confusion about building layouts. Nothing worked. She had been caught red-handed in an area she had no authorization to access, and Command Sergeant Major Brennan was looking at her with the kind of expression that suggested he had already run through her possible excuses and found them all wanting. "I apologize, Master Sergeant," she said. "I'll return to the barracks." "What's your name?" "Private Thornton, Command Sergeant Major, Grace Thornton." Brennan studied her for a long moment. "Farm girl, Ohio. I remember your in-processing file." He took a step closer, and Nora forced herself not to retreat. "You know what I've been doing for 47 years, Private Thornton? I've been watching recruits, thousands of them, tens of thousands. And you know what I've learned?" He paused, and in the silence, Nora could hear her own heartbeat. "Most people can't lie worth a damn. They think they can, but their bodies give them away. Micro-expressions, changes in breathing pattern, the way they distribute their weight when they're nervous." He circled her slowly, examining her the way a jeweler examines a diamond for flaws. "But you," Brennan continued, "you're different. You stand like someone who's been at attention 1,000 times before. You move with the kind of muscle memory that takes years to develop. And your hands, despite what Sergeant Hale said, those aren't farm girl hands. Those are hands that know how to type, how to handle delicate equipment." Nora's pulse hammered against the biosensor. The extraction protocol would be calculating now. Tactical team on standby, waiting for the signal. Brennan stopped directly in front of her, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you really are, Private. Military police, maybe. Inspector General. Could be something else entirely. But I'll tell you what I do know." His eyes held hers with an intensity that left no room for deception. "Sergeant Hale is dangerous. Not dangerous like a drill sergeant should be, pushing recruits to their limits safely. Dangerous like a man who stopped caring about limits a long time ago. I've watched him for 18 months, watched recruits break under his attention, watched careers end and young people get destroyed, and I've been waiting for someone to do something about it." He leaned in slightly. "So whatever you're here to do it fast, because people are getting hurt, and if you're one of the good guys, you won't want that on your conscience." Then Command Sergeant Major William Brennan stepped back, gestured toward the door. "Fire guard duty, Private Thornton. I suggest you get back to it before the morning formation catches you missing." Nora saluted, did an about-face, and walked out of the drill sergeant compound with every ounce of discipline she possessed. She did not run, did not look back, just moved with measured purpose across the open ground as the sky began to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn painting the mountains pink and gold. Back in the barracks, lying on her bunk, Nora's hands were shaking, not from fear, from the realization that she had just been made by someone who had chosen not to expose her. Command Sergeant Major Brennan knew she was undercover, knew, and had let her go. Why? 3 miles away, Thorne would be reviewing the biosensor data, seeing the spike in her stress hormones, running analysis to determine if extraction was necessary. But Nora was not in immediate danger. She was compromised, possibly, but not in physical jeopardy. The mission could continue. It had to continue. Because 4 soldiers were dead in Afghanistan, because 43 recruits had been broken at Fort Morrison, because somewhere in the data she had just stolen, there would be evidence that connected Victor Hale to both tragedies. All she had to do was survive 8 more weeks without getting caught. Without getting hurt badly enough to trigger automatic extraction, without watching Megan Holloway or any of the other recruits get destroyed in the process. Simple, clean, impossible. The math did not work. Someone was going to pay the price for this mission. Nora just hoped it would be her instead of the people she was pretending to protect. Outside, the morning bugle started playing, calling Fort Morrison to another day of making soldiers out of civilians. Private Grace Thornton swung her legs off the bunk, started lacing her boots, preparing to fall into formation with 37 other recruits who thought she was one of them. Captain Nora Callahan buried herself deeper into the lie, knowing that with every passing day, the distance between who she was and who she was pretending to be was getting harder to measure. The first phase was complete. The infiltration was successful. Now came the hard part. Now came the waiting and the watching and the systematic documentation of every violation while people around her suffered. Now came the part where she had to be strong enough to let bad things happen so that worse things could be prevented. 8 weeks until the punch that would end Victor Hale's career. 8 weeks of being invisible while the predators circled closer. 8 weeks of wondering which would break first, her cover or her conscience. The data came back dirty. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Thorne sat in the Tactical Operations Center 3 miles from the main training ground, staring at decrypted files that turned his coffee cold in his hand. The room was dark except for the glow of multiple monitors, each one displaying different streams of information. Biosensor feeds, surveillance footage, communication intercepts. But the screen directly in front of him held his complete attention. The USB drive Nora had pulled from Hale's computer contained 18 months of digital evidence. Every megabyte of it screamed guilt. Encrypted messaging app communications with known members of the Watchmen of Liberty. Phone records showing 47 calls to a burner number traced back to a compound in northern Idaho. Financial transfers totaling $340,000 from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation that did not quite exist on paper. But the smoking gun, the thing that made Thorne's jaw clench hard enough to crack molars, was the file dated August 10th. 2 days before 4 National Guard soldiers died in Kunar Province. A detailed map of patrol routes, convoy timing down to the minute, safe house locations marked with GPS coordinates. The names of 3 Afghan informants working with American forces, men who had risked their lives and their families to help fight the Taliban. Everything the enemy would need to plan a perfect ambush. Hale had accessed that file from his terminal at 0200 hours, well outside his normal duty schedule. He had copied it to an external device, and 26 hours later, Specialist David Wheeler, Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, Private First Class James Okonkwo, and Corporal Ryan Mitchell were dead. Wheeler had been 23 years old, married for 8 months. His wife was pregnant with their first child when the notification officers knocked on her door. Thompson had served 3 tours, was 6 months from retirement, had already put a down payment on a fishing boat in Florida. Okonkwo was the son of Nigerian immigrants, first in his family to serve in the American military, had planned to use the GI Bill to become a doctor. Mitchell was 19, had joined the National Guard to pay for college, had never been outside the United States before the deployment that killed him. 4 lives erased because Victor Hale decided his ideology mattered more than their futures. Thorne pulled up the live biosensor feed on an adjacent monitor. Nora's heart rate was elevated but stable, currently running the morning physical training circuit with her platoon. The implant was working perfectly, transmitting real-time physiological data that let him monitor her condition from a distance. Right now she was under stress, but manageable stress. The kind that came from doing push-ups in 100-degree heat, not the kind that came from immediate physical danger. He picked up the secure phone and dialed the number that connected directly to DIA headquarters in Washington. The director answered on the second ring. "We have confirmation," Thorne said, keeping his voice level despite the anger coiling in his chest. "Hale's the leak. Evidence is solid enough for prosecution. Can you tie it directly to the Kanar incident? With what we've got now, plus Callahan's testimony about observing him access classified systems outside authorized hours?" "Yes, sir. We can put him away for the rest of his life." "Good." Kane's voice carried no satisfaction, only the flat pragmatism of a man who had learned long ago that victories in intelligence work always came with costs. "But there's the matter of the training abuse documentation." "Sir? Congressional oversight is breathing down our necks about military training culture. 3 separate investigations into drill instructor misconduct at other installations. If we're going to burn Hale for treason, we need to also burn him for what he's been doing to those recruits. 2 birds, 1 stone. Complete case. No loose ends." Thorne glanced at the biosensor readout. Nora's cortisol levels were climbing as the physical training intensified. "That means keeping her in place for another 7 weeks. That's why she's there, Colonel. Monitor her closely. If the situation deteriorates beyond acceptable parameters, we extract. But until then, the mission continues." The line went dead. Thorne set the phone down and looked at the screen showing Nora's vitals. Heart rate 130 beats per minute. Blood oxygen levels good. Core temperature elevated but not dangerous. She was fine. She was doing her job. 4 dead soldiers in Afghanistan. 43 broken recruits. 7 more weeks of watching Hale operate while they built an airtight case. The math was cold and clear. Thorne just hoped Nora could hold her cover long enough for the math to work. Because if Hale figured out who she really was before the evidence was complete, the next biosensor alert would not be elevated stress levels. It would be a flatline. The data analysis took 3 days. Thorne worked through it methodically, cross-referencing every communication, every financial transaction, every access log from Hale's computer. The picture that emerged was damning and deeply disturbing. Hale had not simply sold information for money. The financial transfers were significant, yes, but they did not explain the depth of his betrayal. Men did not commit treason for $300,000. Not men with silver stars and 23 years of service. Something else had broken Victor Hale. Something that turned a decorated combat veteran into a man willing to get his fellow soldiers killed. Thorne found the answer buried in personnel files and news archives. Fallujah, Iraq, November 2004. Specialist Ryan Hale, 22 years old, the only son of Victor and Maria Hale, had been assigned to a supply convoy running materials to forward operating bases in Anbar province. The mission was supposed to be routine. Intelligence reports indicated the route was secure, cleared of IED threats, with minimal insurgent activity. The intelligence was wrong. The convoy entered a kill zone at 1400 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. The first RPG struck the lead vehicle before anyone could react. Machine gun fire from rooftops cut through the thin-skinned Humvees like scissors through paper. An IED buried under the road detonated beneath the 3rd vehicle in the column. Ryan Hale was in that vehicle. They found his dog tags 2 days later. There was not enough left of him to fill a casket. Victor Hale received the news via phone call from a casualty notification officer. He was standing in the kitchen of his house at Fort Bragg, looking at a photograph of Ryan in his high school graduation robes, when the words came through the receiver and his world collapsed inward. The months that followed were documented in medical records and counseling reports that Thorne accessed through classified channels. Maria Hale tried to reach her husband, tried to share the grief, tried to find some way through the darkness together. But Victor had retreated into a fortress inside himself that no one could penetrate. They divorced a year later. There was nothing left to hold them together except Ryan, and Ryan was gone. Victor started asking questions. Why had the intelligence been wrong? Who was responsible for clearing that route? Why had his son been sent into a death trap with inadequate protection and faulty information? The answers he received from the chain of command were bureaucratic nothing. Fog of war, unfortunate circumstances, heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice. No one was held accountable. No one lost their position. No one faced consequences for the failures that killed Ryan Hale and 11 other soldiers that day. And then the Watchman of Liberty found him, a contact at a VFW bar. Conversations about the truth the government was hiding. Documents, some real and some fabricated, about how weak leadership and politically correct policies were getting American soldiers killed overseas while politicians in Washington played games with their lives. They told Victor what he desperately needed to hear. That his son's death was not random tragedy, but deliberate betrayal. That the system was broken beyond repair. That real patriots had to take action outside official channels to protect the troops the government had abandoned. Victor Hale was not crazy. Victor Hale had been radicalized. Grief had opened a wound, and the Watchmen of Liberty had poured poison into it. They gave him an enemy to blame, a cause to fight for, a way to transform unbearable loss into righteous anger. Every recruit he broke, he told himself he was weeding out weakness before it could get real soldiers killed. Every piece of classified information he passed along, he convinced himself he was exposing corruption and protecting the troops the Pentagon had abandoned. He did not see himself as a traitor. He saw himself as the last patriot standing. Thorne stared at the psychological profile he had assembled, understanding now what they were truly dealing with. Hale was not a mercenary selling secrets for profit. He was a true believer. And true believers were far more dangerous than mercenaries because they could not be bought off or negotiated with. They could only be stopped. Week 6 brought close quarters combat training and the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like water over the desert floor. Nora stood in formation at 0530, sweat already cutting lines down her face while Sergeant Hale explained the day's lesson plan. The sun was barely up, and already the temperature had pushed past 90 degrees. By noon, it would be over 110. Hand-to-hand combat, Hale said, pacing in front of the platoon like a caged animal looking for escape routes. Some of you think war is about rifles and rockets, technology, push-button killing from a distance. But I'm here to tell you that every real soldier, at some point in their career, will find themselves close enough to the enemy to smell what they had for breakfast. He stopped, surveyed the recruits with eyes that had gone flat and distant. And when that happens, when your rifle jams or your ammunition runs out, or you're just too damn close to shoot, you better know how to put a human being on the ground and keep them there. The training mats had been set up in a large open area behind the barracks, thick rubber squares that would theoretically prevent serious injury when bodies hit the ground. Theoretically. Hale demonstrated techniques on a volunteer first, a big farm kid from Iowa named Anderson, who outweighed Hale by 40 pounds. The sergeant moved with economy and violence, showing how leverage defeated mass, how striking nerve clusters could drop someone regardless of size. Anderson hit the mat 3 times in under a minute, each impact harder than the last. When he stood up after the 3rd throw, he was blinking rapidly and listing slightly to the left. "Who's next?" Hale asked. No one volunteered. Intelligence suggested self-preservation. Hale's gaze swept the formation, searching for something. Weakness, fear, the kind of target that made for good examples. His eyes found Megan Holloway standing in the 2nd rank, and Nora watched his expression shift into something that might have been pleasure if pleasure could have sharp edges. Holloway, front and center. Megan went pale. Nora could see her swallow hard, fighting down the instinct to run. But she stepped forward, moved to the mat, took the position Hale indicated. Her hands came up in a defensive stance that was technically correct but emotionally terrified. Every muscle in her body was locked tight with tension. Hale circled her slowly. "You're scared, I can smell it. That's good. Fear keeps you alive." He moved closer, invading her personal space with practiced intimidation. But fear also makes you freeze, and freezing gets you killed. He was standing directly in front of her now, close enough that his breath moved the fine hairs on her forehead. "I'm going to throw a strike. Your job is to block it. Ready?" Megan nodded, but her breathing was coming too fast. Shallow gasps that suggested she was 3 seconds from a full panic attack. Hale threw a slow jab, telegraphed and obvious. Megan flinched backward instead of blocking. The strike missed by 2 feet, but she still recoiled like she had been hit. Pathetic. Hale's voice was quiet, disappointed, worse than shouting. You just let yourself get killed because someone moved fast near your face. What happened, Holloway? Daddy used to smack you around? You bring that weakness into my army, and it's going to get real soldiers hurt. Megan's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, fighting to keep them from falling, but her whole body was shaking now. Nora watched from the formation. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene, to step forward and draw Hale's attention away from someone who was clearly breaking. But documentation required letting this play out. Building evidence required witnessing harm. The biosensor under her ribs registered her elevated heart rate, transmitted the spike to Thorne 3 miles away. He would be watching now, making calculations about whether this constituted immediate danger to Nora or just regular training brutality that she was required to observe and record. Hale raised his hand again. Megan flinched harder this time, actually stumbled backward. The other recruits watched in uncomfortable silence. This was not training anymore. This was targeted psychological warfare designed to break someone who was already cracking. I volunteer. The words were out of Nora's mouth before her conscious mind authorized them. 37 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Hale's expression flickered through surprise before settling back into that flat, predatory focus. Thornton. He studied her for a long moment, recalibrating, shifting targets. You think you're tough enough to handle what Holloway can't? No, Sergeant. I just think I'm expendable enough that breaking me won't matter as much. It was exactly the kind of thing a farm girl with low self-esteem might say. Self-deprecating, harmless. But Nora watched Hale's eyes narrow slightly, saw the gears turning behind them. He was smart, dangerous and smart. The worst combination. All right, farm girl, Holloway, back in formation. Thornton on the mat. Megan practically ran back to her position, relief and guilt warring across her face. Nora stepped onto the mat, rolled her shoulders, loosened her joints. She had trained in close-quarters combat at DIA. Not extensively, but enough to defend herself. Enough to recognize when someone truly knew what they were doing. But farm girls from Ohio did not have tactical training, so she would have to fake incompetence convincingly while also protecting herself from real injury. Hale moved to the center of the mat, gestured for her to approach. Basic defensive stance. Hands up, knees bent, weight distributed evenly. Show me. Nora took the position, deliberately making it slightly wrong. Too much weight on her heels. Hands too low to effectively block strikes to her head. Amateur mistakes that would look natural from someone without formal instruction. Hale circled her, correcting her posture with sharp taps from his hands, each contact harder than necessary. Little jolts of controlled violence that sent messages about who held the power here. Better. Now I'm going to throw some strikes, half speed. Your job is to block or evade. Don't try to counter. Don't try to be a hero, just defense. Understand? Yes, Sergeant. The first jab came at 60% speed, fast enough to be realistic, slow enough that blocking it was possible for someone with no training. Nora parried it with her forearm, the impact sending a jolt up to her shoulder. Acceptable. Looked authentic. Second strike came faster, a cross aimed at her ribs. Nora twisted, took it on her upper arm instead of her body. The force pushed her back 2 steps, and she had to work to make the stumble look natural instead of like a controlled tactical retreat. Not bad, Hale said. You've got decent reflexes. Let's see how they hold up under pressure. The third strike came at full speed, no warning. A hook aimed at her jaw with enough force behind it to rattle teeth. Nora's training kicked in before she could stop it. She slipped the punch with a subtle shift of her head, letting it sail past her ear by 2 inches. And in that same motion, her body started to counter, hip rotating, knee coming up to drive into his exposed ribs. She caught herself, aborted the movement mid-execution, turned it into an awkward stumble instead. But for half a heartbeat, maybe less, her real training had shown through. The muscle memory of someone who had been taught to fight by professionals, not by YouTube videos and weekend self-defense seminars. Hale's eyes went cold and sharp. He had seen it. Not the counter itself, but the way she had moved. Too controlled, too practiced. The kind of economy of motion that took years to develop. Where'd you learn that? Learn what, Sergeant? Keep the confusion authentic. A farm girl would not know what she had done wrong. That slip, that footwork. Hale stepped closer, invading her personal space, using his size to intimidate. Nobody teaches that in basic self-defense classes. That's professional instruction. Nora felt the biosensor spike against her ribs. 3 miles away, Thorne would be seeing her stress hormones jump, making calculations about extraction protocols. I don't know what you mean, Sergeant. I just moved without thinking. No. Hale grabbed her wrist, held it up between them. His grip was just short of painful. You moved with precision, efficiency, the way people move when they've been trained to kill. His grip tightened slightly. So I'm going to ask you one more time, Private Thornton. Where did a farm girl from Ohio learn close-quarters combat techniques? The silence stretched out like razor wire. 36 recruits watching, waiting, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Nora understood with crystalline clarity that her cover was disintegrating in real time. Hale suspected. Maybe did not know for certain yet, but suspected enough to be dangerous. She could try another lie. Manufacture some explanation about a self-defense course at community college. A boyfriend who taught her a few moves. Something plausible enough to maybe deflect suspicion. Or she could tell a version of the truth that might actually work better. My father, Nora said quietly, letting her voice shake slightly like the words were coming from somewhere painful. He was military police, stationed in Germany before I was born. He taught me some things before he left. It was close enough to real to feel authentic. Nora's actual father had been a Marine. He died in a training accident when she was 6 years old. The grief in her voice when she mentioned him was not manufactured. Hale studied her face with the intensity of an interrogator, looking for the tells that indicated deception. But grief was harder to fake than most emotions, and Nora let him see it. The loss. The complicated relationship with a military that had taken her father too early. After a moment that lasted too long, Hale released her wrist. Military brat. His voice still carried suspicion, and his eyes had not warmed up at all. That explains some things. He stepped back, gestured toward the formation. Get back in line, Thornton. I'm not done with you. Nora returned to her position, feeling 36 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Megan caught her eye, mouthed, "Thank you," silently. Nora gave the smallest nod in response while her mind raced through scenarios. Hale suspected she was not who she claimed to be. He was intelligent enough to be paranoid, experienced enough to trust his instincts. If he started digging into Grace Thornton's background, if he made phone calls to verify her story, the DIA manufactured identity would hold up to casual inspection, but not to determined investigation. The mission timeline had just accelerated. 7 weeks until the planned extraction suddenly felt like far too long. She needed to force his hand, soon. That night, after lights out, Nora lay in her bunk and listened to the barracks breathe. 37 other people trying to find sleep in the darkness. Their sounds created a symphony of exhaustion, snoring, shifting on thin mattresses. The occasional nightmare whimper from someone whose mind would not let them rest. Megan's bunk was 2 feet away, and Nora could hear her crying again. Soft, suppressed sounds that suggested someone who had had a lot of practice crying quietly. The kind of skill you developed when making noise brought punishment. After 10 minutes of listening to it, Nora could not take it anymore. Megan, you awake? The crying stopped. Several seconds of silence. Then, barely audible. Yeah. Come here. Megan slipped out of her bunk, moved to sit on the edge of Nora's mattress. In the darkness, her face was just a pale oval, but Nora could see the tear tracks reflecting what little light came through the barracks windows. Thank you, Megan whispered, for volunteering. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Nora sat up, kept her voice low enough that it would not carry to the other bunks. He was going to hurt you, Megan. Really hurt you. Not just training hard, something worse. I could see it in his eyes. Why do you care? We barely know each other. Because you remind me of my sister. Because I watched Amanda get destroyed by someone like Hale, and I did nothing to stop it. Because I am supposed to be documenting abuse, but I keep forgetting that the people getting abused are real humans, with real trauma and real breaking points. Because it's wrong, Nora said. It was the simplest truth she could offer. What he's doing to you, the way he targets you specifically, that's not training, that's cruelty. Megan was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My father, he used to hit my mom. Not all the time. Just when he'd been drinking, or when money was tight, or when she said something that set him off. And the way Sergeant Hale moves, the way he gets close and makes you feel trapped, it's the same. Exactly the same. She drew a shaky breath. I thought joining the army would be different. I thought I'd be safe here, that the rules would protect me, that no one could just decide to hurt me because they felt like it. Nora felt something crack inside her chest. The mission parameters were clear. Document abuse. Gather evidence. Do not get emotionally involved. But those parameters had not accounted for sitting in the dark with a 19-year-old girl who had escaped one predator only to be delivered to another. Listen to me. Nora's voice came out harder than she intended. Officer voice. The kind of authority that Private Grace Thornton should not possess. She softened it quickly. You're stronger than you think. Hale picks on you because he can see that strength, and he wants to break it before it becomes a threat, but he can't break you unless you let him. I'm not strong. I'm terrified all the time. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Nora grabbed Megan's hand, held it tight. 6 more weeks, that's all. 6 weeks, and we graduate, and we never have to see Sergeant Hale again. Can you make it 6 weeks? Megan's hand trembled in hers. I don't know. I know you can. And I'll be right there with you. Whatever he throws at us, we handle it together, all right? All right. Megan's voice was small but steadier. Grace, can I ask you something? Yeah. That move you almost did today, on the mat. That wasn't something your dad taught you for fun, was it? That was real combat training. Nora's stomach dropped. Megan had seen it too. If a 19-year-old ranch girl from Montana could see through her cover, how long before someone else did? How long before Hale put the pieces together? I told you, my father was military police. I believe you about your father. Megan's voice was gentle, not accusatory. But I think maybe there's more to it than you're saying. And that's okay. We all have secrets. She paused. I just wanted you to know that if you're here for a reason other than basic training, if you're trying to do something about Hale, I'll help however I can. The offer hung in the air between them, dangerous and tempting. Nora could recruit Megan as an informal asset, get her testimony, use her observations to strengthen the case. It would be tactically smart. It would also be ethically monstrous. I'm just trying to graduate, Nora lied. Same as you. Megan nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she did not quite believe it. Okay, thanks again for today. She slipped back to her own bunk, leaving Nora alone in the darkness with the weight of too many lies pressing down on her chest. The biosensor under her ribs transmitted steady, elevated stress markers to Thorne's monitoring station. But Nora was not in immediate physical danger, so the extraction protocol stayed dormant. She was just a soldier doing her job. Gathering evidence, building a case that would eventually bring down a traitor and an abuser. The mission was proceeding according to plan. So why did it feel like everything was falling apart? Week 8 brought the breaking point. Hale had been escalating his targeting of Megan incrementally, like a scientist increasing dosage in an experiment. Extra fire guard shifts that destroyed her sleep schedule. Arbitrary uniform inspections where he found fault with things that were objectively correct. Psychological pressure applied with surgical precision, designed to find breaking points and exploit them. On Thursday morning during physical training, Megan collapsed. They were running the obstacle course, a circuit of walls to climb, trenches to cross, rope bridges to traverse. Megan had been struggling, her exhaustion obvious in every movement. Dark circles under her eyes, hands that shook when she gripped the climbing ropes. The accumulated weight of 8 weeks of targeted abuse finally becoming too heavy to carry. Nora stayed close, offering quiet encouragement, physically helping when she could without being obvious about it. But on the last obstacle, a 12-foot wall that required upper body strength most of the recruits barely possessed. Megan's arms simply gave out. She fell backward from 6 feet up, landed wrong. Her ankle made a sound like green wood snapping. The screaming brought everything to a halt. Medics were called. Megan was loaded onto a stretcher, her face gray with pain and shock, tears streaming down her cheeks. As they carried her past the formation, Nora saw Hale make a note on his clipboard. Calm, professional. Recording another training injury with the emotional investment of someone documenting inventory. Megan was gone for 3 hours. When she returned, she had crutches, a walking boot, and orders for light duty until the ankle healed. 6 weeks minimum before she could return to full training, which meant she would be recycled, sent back to start over with a new platoon, subjected to another 12 weeks of what had already nearly destroyed her. That night, Nora found Megan in the latrine at 0200 hours. The lights were harsh fluorescent white, making everything look sterile and cold. The kind of lighting that showed every flaw, every shadow, every trace of despair on a human face. Megan sat on the floor in the corner. The crutches lay beside her, and in her hand was a small folding knife she must have smuggled past in processing somehow. She was looking at her wrists. Nora froze in the doorway, every tactical calculation evaporating in the face of immediate crisis. Megan, don't! Megan looked up. Her eyes were empty, hollowed out, the expression Nora had seen on combat veterans who had stopped believing in tomorrow, who had lost the ability to imagine a future worth surviving for. It doesn't get better, does it? Megan's voice was flat, emotionless. I get recycled. Start over. 12 more weeks with someone just like him. Or maybe even him again if I get unlucky. She turned the knife over in her hands. And if I quit, I go back home. Back to my father. Back to the house where my mother died because she couldn't leave and I couldn't save her. Her eyes met Nora's. There's no way out, Grace. I've been trying to find one for 8 weeks. And there's no way out. Nora moved slowly, careful not to spook her. She sat down on the cold tile floor 3 feet away, close enough to grab the knife if necessary, far enough not to feel threatening. There's always a way out. It might not be the way you want, but it exists. Like what? Like graduating, like getting through this and requesting a transfer to a different base, different unit, different drill sergeants who aren't broken inside. Nora kept her voice steady, calm, the way she had been trained to speak to assets in crisis. Like using the army to build a life away from your father and away from Hale. 6 weeks of medical hold, 6 weeks of new training, 12 more weeks total. You can survive 12 weeks. I'm not strong like you. I'm not strong, Megan. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Nora inched closer, held out her hand. Give me the knife. Why do you care? Megan's voice cracked. You don't even really know me. Nobody knows me. I'm just another broken recruit who couldn't hack it. Because I failed my sister and I will not fail you. Because every time I look at you, I see Amanda. And I need to save you in a way I could not save her. Because this mission was supposed to be about justice, but it has become about keeping people alive until justice can arrive. Because you're worth saving, Nora said simply. Even if you don't believe it right now, you are. And 5 years from now, when you're somewhere else living a life that doesn't include abusive men, you're going to be glad you didn't do this. Megan's hand shook. The knife trembled. For a long moment that stretched out like years, the outcome balanced on the edge of decision. Then Megan handed the knife over. Nora took it, and Megan collapsed forward into her arms, sobbing. Great. Heaving sobs that shook her entire body, the accumulated grief and terror of 19 years pouring out in the harsh light of a military latrine in the Arizona desert. Nora held her, let her cry, and triggered the emergency signal on her biosensor. Not the full Omega Red protocol, the medical emergency code. Within minutes, medical personnel would arrive. Megan would be taken to mental health services. She would be put on suicide watch, evaluated, treated. Eventually medically discharged for psychological reasons. She would be safe. She would be out. She would be one more name added to the list of recruits that Victor Hale had broken. As they waited for the medics, Nora made a decision. The mission parameters had just changed. She was not waiting 7 more weeks. She was not documenting abuse while people died. She was going to force Hale's hand, trigger the confrontation, end this now, even if it meant getting hurt, even if it meant blowing her cover early. Some things were worth more than perfect evidence. Some things required imperfect action. The next morning, Hale found Nora after physical training. Holloway got medevac last night, mental health services. His voice was casual, conversational, as if discussing the weather. You know anything about that, Thornton? I found her in the latrine, Sergeant. She was struggling. I called the medics. Hale studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, dropping his voice so only she could hear. You know what's funny, Thornton? I've known someone was watching me for months, phone getting tapped, emails being read, someone very professional building a case against me. Nora's pulse hammered against the biosensor. I don't know what you mean, Sergeant. Yes, you do. Hale's eyes were flat and cold, the eyes of a predator who had finally identified his hunter. I don't know exactly who you are. Military police, Inspector General, maybe something worse. But I've been waiting to see who would slip up first, waiting to see who didn't quite fit. He leaned in, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. And now I think I'm looking right at her. Silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Whatever you're planning, Hale said quietly, whatever you think you know about me, it doesn't matter, because I've been preparing for this for a long time. And I promise you, farm girl, you have no idea what you gotten yourself into. He stepped back, his expression shifting back to professional neutrality. Advanced combat readiness drills tomorrow. Full intensity. I expect to see you volunteer first. Then he walked away, leaving Nora standing in the morning heat with the full weight of his threat settling around her shoulders like a shroud. He knew, maybe not everything, maybe not the details, but he knew someone was after him, and he had identified her as the threat. The mission was compromised. The question now was not whether confrontation would happen, but when, and whether she could survive it long enough for the cavalry to arrive. That night, Nora lay awake, staring at the ceiling, running scenarios. Hale would try to expose her, force her to reveal her training, her true identity, in front of witnesses. He would frame it as self-defense, claim he discovered an infiltrator and had to neutralize the threat. If she defended herself properly, used her real combat training, she would prove his accusation. 36 recruits would witness her transformation from farm girl to trained operative. Her body would be shipped home with training accident paperwork. If she did not defend herself, he would hurt her badly enough that the biosensor would trigger automatic extraction, but not before he had done potentially permanent damage, not before he had proven his point. Either way, he won, unless she could find a third option, unless Command Sergeant Major Brennan was willing to do more than just let her go with a warning. Nora closed her eyes, feeling the biosensor pulse steadily against her ribs. Tomorrow would decide everything. Tomorrow, one way or another, Victor Hale's 23-year career was going to end. She just had to survive long enough to see it happen. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when Sergeant Hale announced the advanced combat readiness drills. 36 recruits stood in formation on the training ground, the Arizona heat already building toward another punishing day. The combat mats had been laid out in a large square, thick rubber surfaces that would theoretically cushion falls and prevent serious injury. Theoretically. Nora stood in the second rank, feeling the weight of what was coming settle into her bones. She had not slept, had spent the night running scenarios, calculating odds, preparing herself for the confrontation that Hale had all but promised. The biosensor pulsed steadily against her ribs. 3 miles away, Thorne would be watching her vitals, ready to scramble the extraction team if her readings crossed into critical territory. But extraction took time, minutes that could mean the difference between rescue and body recovery. Hale paced in front of the formation, his movements controlled and predatory. Today we test everything you've learned. Full contact, full intensity, no holding back. His eyes swept the ranks, lingered on Nora for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. I'll be demonstrating techniques personally. Who wants to volunteer first? Silence. No one moved. The memory of what Hale had done to Anderson, to Megan, to every recruit who had caught his attention, kept hands firmly at sides and eyes fixed forward. Nora's hand shot up. "I volunteer, Sergeant." 35 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She could feel their confusion, their concern, their relief that someone else had stepped into the crosshairs. Hale's expression flickered through something that might have been satisfaction before settling into professional neutrality. "Thornton, front and center." Nora stepped out of formation and walked to the mat. Each step felt deliberate, weighted with significance. This was the moment everything had been building toward. 10 weeks of lies. 10 weeks of watching people suffer. 10 weeks of being someone she was not. It ended here, one way or another. Hale moved to the center of the mat, rolling his shoulders, loosening his joints with the casual ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before. His body language radiated controlled violence, the coiled tension of a predator preparing to strike. "Basic rule," he announced for the benefit of the watching recruits. "Full contact sparring. Defensive techniques only from the trainee. I attack, you defend. Demonstrate everything you've learned." He dropped his voice so only Nora could hear. "Or everything you've been hiding." They faced each other across 6 feet of rubber mat. Nora raised her hands in a defensive stance, deliberately keeping it slightly wrong. Too much weight on her heels. Guard too low. The posture of someone with minimal training trying to remember lessons learned in a classroom. Hale began circling, slow, methodical, a shark testing the waters before the attack. "You keep volunteering, Thornton. Keep putting yourself between me and the other recruits." His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Why is that?" "Because I can take it better than they can." "Sergeant." "Can you?" He moved closer, invading her space with practiced intimidation. "I've been looking into you, made some phone calls, talked to people in Ohio who remember Grace Thornton." Nora's heart rate spiked. The biosensor transmitted the jump to Thorne's monitoring station. "And you know what's funny? Everyone remembers you perfectly. Your teachers, your neighbors, the guy who runs the feed store in Perryville." Hale's eyes were flat and cold. "They remember you exactly the way your file says they should. Word for word, detail for detail, like someone gave them a script to memorize." He stopped directly in front of her. "That's not how memory works. Real memories are messy, contradictory. People remember different things, but everyone I talk to remember Grace Thornton exactly the same way. Perfectly. Too perfectly." His hand shot out, grabbed her wrist, twisted it to the edge of pain. "So I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you really? DIA? CIA? Pentagon inspector sent to destroy my career?" Nora kept her expression neutral despite the pain radiating up her arm. "I don't understand what you're talking about, Sergeant. I'm just a farm girl trying to serve my country." "Liar!" Hale released her wrist, shoved her backward hard enough that she stumbled. "Here's what's going to happen. Whoever you are, I'm going to attack you. Really attack you. And when the pain gets bad enough, when your instincts take over, you're going to fight back with that professional training you've been hiding." He raised his fist. "And when you do, I'll have 36 witnesses who saw you reveal yourself as an infiltrator. Self-defense against an enemy agent becomes justified. Your body gets shipped home with training accident paperwork and nobody asks any questions." The logic was airtight. Nora understood it with perfect clarity. If she defended herself properly, used her real training, she would prove his accusation, die as an exposed spy. If she did not defend herself, he would beat her until the biosensor triggered extraction. But extraction took 6 minutes minimum, and Hale was not going to give her 6 minutes. Either way, she lost, unless the cavalry was already closer than he realized. "You're wrong," Nora said quietly. "I'm just a farm girl. But if hitting me makes you feel powerful, Sergeant, go ahead. I won't stop you." It was the worst thing she could have said. Hale's face twisted with rage. The anger of a predator denied the satisfaction of a chase. He wanted her to fight, wanted her to prove him right. Her passive resistance was an insult to everything he believed about himself. The first punch came without warning, a straight right aimed at her solar plexus, thrown with full force and murderous intent. Nora twisted at the last second, took the blow on her side instead of her center mass. Pain exploded through her ribs, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She stumbled but did not fall, did not fight back. Hale pressed the attack. Combination strikes that blurred together. Jab to the face, cross to the body, hook aimed at her temple. Each blow landed with bone-jarring force, each impact sending new waves of pain crashing through her nervous system. Nora blocked what she could, absorbed what she could not. Her arms came up to protect her head, sacrificing her body to keep her brain intact. Blood filled her mouth from a split lip. Her left eye was already swelling shut. Through the haze of pain, she could hear the recruits murmuring, shifting uncomfortably. This was not training. This was assault. Everyone watching knew it, but no one moved. No one intervened. Fear of Hale kept them frozen in place, witnesses to brutality they were powerless to stop. "Fight back," Hale snarled. "Show them what you really are." A knee strike caught Nora in the thigh, dead-legging her. She dropped to one knee, gasping, vision blurring at the edges. The biosensor was screaming now, transmitting critical stress levels to Thorne's monitoring station. Extraction protocol activating. Teams scrambling. Vehicles spinning up. 6 minutes away. Maybe 5. An eternity. Hale grabbed her by the collar, hauled her upright, pulled her close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. "I know what you are," he hissed. "I've known for weeks. You think you're clever? You think your little undercover operation was going to take me down?" He threw her backward. She hit the mat hard, shoulder blades slamming into the rubber surface, stars exploding across her vision. 4 soldiers died because of intelligence failures, because weak leaders made bad decisions. My son died because nobody in Washington gave a damn about the troops they were sending into combat. Hale stood over her, fists clenched, chest heaving. "And now they send you, some analyst playing soldier, to destroy everything I've built?" Nora lay on the mat, blood running down her chin, ribs screaming with every breath. Through her one good eye, she could see the recruits standing in frozen horror, could see the fear on their faces, the desperate desire to help warring with the knowledge that intervention meant destruction. And beyond them, at the edge of the training ground, she saw a figure watching. Command Sergeant Major William Brennan, 67 years old, 47 years of service, standing motionless with his hand on his phone, waiting for the right moment. Their eyes met across the distance. Brennan nodded once. Then he raised the phone to his ear. Hale reared back for another strike, a haymaker that would have shattered her cheekbone if it landed. His fist descended like a hammer, powered by 23 years of rage and grief, and the desperate need to silence the woman who threatened everything he had built. The sound of engines cut through the morning air. Not one engine, multiple engines. High-performance vehicles pushed beyond safe operating limits, screaming across the desert like banshees announcing the arrival of judgment. Hale's fist stopped mid-swing. His head whipped toward the sound, confusion replacing rage as 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans tore across the open training ground. They ignored marked roads, ignored designated paths, kicked up rooster tails of red Arizona dust as they raced toward the combat mat with the urgency of vehicles driven by people who understood that seconds measured in fractions could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. The Suburbans screamed to a halt in tactical formation, boxing in the training area with professional precision. Doors flew open before the vehicles fully stopped. Men in plain clothes poured out, tactical pants, polo shirts, plate carriers without unit insignia. They carried short-barreled rifles that were definitely not standard military issue, moved with the coordinated economy of operators who had conducted hostile extractions in places where governments did not officially send operators. 4 men separated from the tactical team, moving toward the mat with purposeful strides. Colonel Marcus Webb. Silver hair, build of a man who had spent a lifetime in special operations. Silver Star and Bronze Star ribbons that he was not currently wearing, but that everyone who mattered knew about. Colonel Thomas Harrison. They called him Hawk. Eyes that missed nothing. Reputation for leading missions that officially never happened. 3 combat tours in theaters that were still classified. Colonel Franklin Mercer. Quiet authority that came from competence rather than volume. The kind of officer who led from the front and never asked his men to do anything he would not do himself. Colonel Robert Patterson. Stone, they called him. 52 years old, face carved from granite, the senior officer of a unit that did not exist on any organizational chart. 4 SEAL colonels, 4 men whose authority superseded normal chains of command, 4 judges arriving to deliver a verdict that had been rendered the moment Victor Hale decided to sell out his fellow soldiers. But what made Hale's face go pale was not the tactical team. It was the woman who stepped out of the lead Suburban. Lieutenant General Patricia Aldridge moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had earned the right to take her time. 58 years old, steel gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, stars gleaming on her shoulders. Her eyes had stopped tolerating nonsense around the time most people were learning to walk, and right now those eyes were fixed on Victor Hale with an expression that promised destruction. Hale snapped to attention automatically. 30 years of conditioning overriding his confusion, his fear, his desperate calculations about how this situation might still be salvageable. "General, ma'am, we were conducting training exercises. This recruit showed signs of—" "Be silent, Sergeant." 3 words, delivered without raising her voice, carrying the weight of absolute authority. General Aldridge walked past Hale like he was furniture someone had left in the wrong place. She moved directly to Nora, assessed her with a glance that took in the split lip, the swelling eye, the blood on the mat, the way she held her ribs like they might be cracked. "Captain," the general's voice was calm, professional. "Are you secure?" 1 word. Captain. The word hit the assembled recruits like a flashbang grenade. 36 brains tried to process the impossible transformation of Private Grace Thornton into something else entirely. Tried to reconcile the clumsy farm girl who had slept in the bunk next to them, who had struggled through PT and fumbled her way through rifle training, with the woman now being addressed as an officer by a 3-star general. Nora straightened despite the pain. Felt something fundamental shift in her posture, her bearing, her entire way of existing in the world. The farm girl evaporated like morning mist. The officer emerged. Captain Nora Callahan of the Defense Intelligence Agency stood on that mat, covered in her own blood, and met General Aldridge's eyes without flinching. "Secure, General. Cover obviously compromised." Her voice had changed too, dropped the rural Ohio accent, picked up the crisp diction of someone who had given briefings in rooms where mistakes cost lives. Operation Glass House concluded. The silence that followed could have been measured in geological time. Hale's face cycled through emotions too fast to catalog. Confusion, realization, anger, fear. The final destination was a kind of sick understanding, like watching someone do math and realize the equation equals their own destruction. Colonel Webb moved forward with zip ties. Professional, efficient, binding Hale's wrist behind his back with practiced speed, while the sergeant stood frozen, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "Master Sergeant Victor Hale," Nora's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "I am Captain Nora Callahan, Defense Intelligence Agency. For the past 10 weeks, I have documented systematic training violations conducted under your authority. 14 separate incidents of unauthorized physical discipline, psychological abuse targeting vulnerable recruits, harassment and intimidation, violation of military training doctrine at every level." She took a breath, let the next words carry the full weight of what they meant. "But that's not why you're being arrested today." Nora pulled a small tablet from her pocket, held it up so Hale could see the screen. Phone records, encrypted messages, financial transfers, the complete digital footprint of his betrayal. August 10th, 2040 hours. You accessed classified patrol route information from your terminal at the drill sergeant compound. Information detailing convoy movements, safe house locations, and indigenous informant identities in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Her voice hardened. 26 hours later, 4 National Guard soldiers were killed in a Taliban ambush at coordinates that matched that classified data exactly. Specialist David Wheeler, Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, Private First Class James Okonkwo, Corporal Ryan Mitchell. She let the names hang in the air. "You have been in contact with members of the Watchmen of Liberty, a domestic extremist organization. You sold classified information that resulted in American deaths. 4 soldiers who trusted their government to protect them died because you decided Your ideology mattered more than their lives. Hale's face had gone from pale to gray. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't. Those people told me the truth about what happened to my son, about how weak leadership got him killed. Someone had to. Your son died in combat. Nora's voice was ice over steel. That is tragedy. That is loss that no parent should have to bear. But you killed 4 more sons through treason. That is evil. And you do not get to hide behind Michael's memory to justify it. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the blood still drying on her chin, the determination in her one good eye. Ryan Hale was a hero. He died serving his country. And you dishonored his sacrifice by becoming the very thing he fought against. Command Sergeant Major Brennan appeared at the edge of the mat. He had been watching from the beginning, had made the call that brought the cavalry racing across the desert. 47 years of service had taught him to recognize when the system needed outside intervention, when waiting for normal channels meant watching good people get destroyed. 47 years, Brennan said quietly. 47 years I've been waiting for someone brave enough to do what needed to be done, to stand up against men who abuse their authority and call it training, to protect the recruits we're supposed to be building into soldiers, not breaking into victims. He looked at Nora with something like respect. Today I saw it. Colonel Patterson and Colonel Mercer escorted Hale toward one of the waiting Suburbans. The sergeant who had terrorized recruits for 18 months did not resist. Just walked between them in silence, looking at the faces surrounding him like he was trying to understand how he had arrived at this moment. How 23 years of service had ended with zip ties and treason charges on a dusty training ground in Arizona. General Aldridge turned to face the assembled recruits, swept her gaze across all 36 of them. What you witnessed here today is classified at the highest levels. You will be debriefed individually, and you will sign non-disclosure agreements. The official story is that Private Grace Thornton received a medical discharge. That is all you know. That is all you will ever know. Her voice left no room for questions. A new drill sergeant cadre is being assigned as we speak. The abuse stops today. You have my word on that. She paused and something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. You came here to become soldiers, to serve your country. That is still possible. What happened under Sergeant Hale's command was a failure of leadership, not a failure of the Army's mission. Do not let one broken man define your service. The recruits were dismissed back to the barracks, filing away in stunned silence. Nora could hear them talking in hushed, urgent voices, trying to process what they had witnessed, trying to reconcile 2 incompatible versions of reality. General Aldridge waited until they were out of earshot. You took a risk staying in as long as you did. Hale was getting close to exposing you. Another day, maybe 2, and we would have been extracting a body instead of an operative. We needed the evidence, ma'am. Complete documentation. And you got it. Treason charges, training violations, a network of complicit contacts were already rolling up. Aldridge's expression carried something that might have been approval. Your testimony and the digital evidence you gathered will put him away for 25 years minimum. Possibly life. Nora touched her split lip, felt the dried blood crack under her fingers. What's the count now? Recruits discharged under Hale's command? 43 documented cases over 18 months. 43 people broken. 4 soldiers dead in Afghanistan. And she had watched it happen for 10 weeks while she gathered evidence. Tell me the math works. General, tell me what I did was worth it. Aldridge was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. 400 recruits will cycle through Fort Morrison this year. Next year, 400 more. Without your investigation, they would all face the culture Hale created, the abuse, the psychological destruction, the systematic breaking of young people who came here wanting to serve. She met Nora's eyes directly. Now they won't. The math works, Captain. It just doesn't feel good. That was the truth of it. The cold, clean truth that did not account for Megan's tears or the 43 names on a list of people who had trusted the system to protect them and been betrayed instead. Medical personnel arrived to treat Nora's injuries. Cracked ribs, confirmed. Facial contusions. Split lip that would need stitches. Nothing permanent, but enough damage to remind her for weeks of the price she had paid. As they loaded her into a vehicle for transport to the base hospital, Nora looked back at the training ground one last time. The mats were being rolled up. The Suburbans were departing. Command Sergeant Major Brennan stood alone at the edge of the parade deck, watching her go. He raised one hand in a slow salute. Nora returned it through the window. Then the vehicle pulled away, and Fort Morrison disappeared behind a curtain of red Arizona dust. 8 weeks later, the military tribunal at Fort Leavenworth handed down its verdict. The courtroom smelled like old wood and older justice. High ceilings, dark paneling, the accumulated weight of decades of proceedings where the military held its own accountable. Nora sat in the gallery wearing her dress uniform, decorations on her chest including the new commendation for Operation Glass House. The ribbon was small, unobtrusive, the kind of recognition that most people would never notice or understand. But she knew what it represented. 10 weeks of lies, 10 weeks of watching people suffer, 10 weeks of becoming someone she was not in service of, stopping someone who should never have been allowed to operate. Victor Hale stood at the defendant's table as the charges were read. Treason resulting in death, assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming, conspiracy to provide material support to domestic terrorists. The evidence had been presented over 3 days of testimony, documents, and digital forensics that left no room for doubt. His defense attorney had tried everything: entrapment, illegal infiltration, violation of his client's rights, mental instability resulting from the death of his son. None of it stuck. The evidence was too solid, the deaths in Afghanistan too real, the pattern of abuse too well documented. The military judge was a colonel in his 60s with eyes that had seen too many soldiers fail the standards they had sworn to uphold. He read the verdict without emotion. Master Sergeant Victor Hale, this tribunal finds you guilty on all charges. The sentence is as follows: reduction to the rank of E1, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, dishonorable discharge from the United States Army, and confinement for 25 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks. The gavel came down with the finality of a door slamming shut. Hale stood at attention, face blank, accepting his destruction with the same rigid discipline he had demanded from thousands of recruits over 23 years. When the military police moved to take him away, he looked directly at Nora across the courtroom. She met his eyes, did not look away, did not give him the satisfaction of seeing guilt or uncertainty. What she had done was necessary. The math worked. 4 soldiers had justice now. 400 future recruits would be safer. The cost was acceptable. It had to be acceptable. Outside the courtroom, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne was waiting with a manila folder. Final piece of business, ma'am. Fort Morrison Reform Implementation Report. General Aldridge wanted you to see the results. Nora took the folder, scanned the statistics. Training discharge rate down 89%. Retention rate up 47%. 0 abuse complaints in the past 2 months under the new drill sergeant cadre. Anonymous survey results showing recruit confidence in leadership had increased from 23% to 81%. The numbers were good. The mission had achieved every objective. There's one more thing, Thorne said. Personal correspondence. Arrived at your Pentagon office this morning. He handed her a letter. The return address was a psychiatric facility in Colorado. Megan Holloway's handwriting on the envelope was shaky but legible. Nora waited until she was alone in her car before opening it. The letter was short, written on lined notebook paper, with careful, deliberate strokes. Captain Callahan, the doctors say I'm doing better. They put me on medication for PTSD and depression. I'm sleeping now without nightmares most nights. They say I might be ready to try again in 6 months. Not the Army. College, maybe. Something different. I've been thinking a lot about what you did, about the lying. I was angry for a long time. Felt used. Felt like the friendship we had was just another mission objective you needed to check off. But my therapist asked me a question. Would I rather have been lied to and saved, or told the truth and destroyed? I don't know the answer yet. Maybe there isn't a good answer. Maybe some questions don't have clean solutions. But I wanted you to know that I'm alive because you were there. Even if you weren't who I thought you were, you still saved me. Twice. Once from Hale and once from myself. I don't forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I understand why you did it, and I think that's enough for now. Megan Nora read the letter 3 times. Then she carefully folded it and placed it in her jacket pocket next to her heart. Not forgiveness, understanding. It was more than she had expected, less than she had hoped for, which seemed to define everything about Operation Glasshouse. She drove back to her Pentagon office through late afternoon traffic, thinking about math. 4 dead soldiers, 43 broken recruits, 25 years in prison for Victor Hale, 89% reduction in abuse cases, Megan Holloway alive and getting help. The equation balanced, objectively, mathematically. The mission was a success, but success tasted like blood and lies and the weight of betrayed trust. 2 years later, Nora received notification that Second Lieutenant Megan Holloway had completed Officer Candidate School and been commissioned into the United States Army. She had finished her college degree in 18 months, driven by something that looked like purpose from the outside but felt like redemption from within. Then she had applied to OCS, been accepted, and graduated in the top 10% of her class. Her first duty assignment request had been for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Nora stared at the personnel file for a long time. Megan had turned her worst experience into motivation for service, had transformed trauma into determination, had decided that the best way to prevent what had happened to her from happening to others was to become someone who could stop it. The request came through official channels 3 months later. Second Lieutenant Megan Holloway, recently commissioned, was applying for a position with DIA's Strategic Analysis Division. She had listed Lieutenant Colonel Nora Callahan as a professional reference. Nora wrote the recommendation letter herself. Honest, thorough, highlighting Megan's resilience, her understanding of operational security, her unique perspective on the costs and necessities of intelligence work. 2 months later, Second Lieutenant Holloway was assigned to DIA headquarters, working 3 floors below Nora's office. They did not speak for the first month. Passed each other in hallways with professional nods. Nothing more. Nora did not push. If Megan needed distance, she had earned the right to maintain it. Then one day, Nora found a note on her desk. Just a time and a location. A coffee shop outside the Pentagon. Neutral ground. Megan was already there when Nora arrived, wearing her service uniform. Coffee untouched on the table in front of her. She had changed in the 2 years since basic training. Looked older, harder around the edges. But there was something in her eyes that suggested the nightmares had receded enough to let her sleep. Colonel, Lieutenant. Nora sat down across from her, ordered coffee she did not really want, waited. I requested this assignment for a reason, Megan said finally. I need to understand what you did, not the mission parameters or the operational justification. I've read those reports. I need to understand how you live with it. The lying, the watching people suffer while you documented everything. How do you carry that? Nora considered several responses before settling on the truth. Not well. I have a therapist I see twice a month. I don't sleep great. I think about the 43 people on Hale's list and wonder if I could have stopped it sooner. I think about you specifically most nights. Because you failed to protect me, because I succeeded in saving you, and it still feels like failure. You shouldn't have needed saving. You should have been safe from the start. Nora wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing the warmth despite the summer heat outside. The math works, Megan. 400 recruits this year didn't face what you faced. That's success by any objective measure. But math doesn't account for trust, or trauma, or the cost of doing necessary things that feel wrong. Megan was quiet for a long moment. I joined DIA because I want to do what you did. Go undercover. Stop bad things before they hurt people. Use my experience to make sure fewer people have to go through what I went through. That's not redemption, Nora said gently. That's just transferring your trauma onto new situations. Maybe, or maybe it's using pain as fuel for purpose. My therapist says that's healthy coping. Megan finally took a sip of her coffee. I'm not asking your permission. I'm asking for your guidance. You did this job. You survived it. Teach me how. Nora looked at the young woman across from her. 21 years old now, commissioned officer, trauma survivor who had turned her worst experience into motivation for service. It would be easy to say no, to protect Megan from the moral complexity of intelligence work, to keep her away from situations that required lying to good people to catch bad ones. But Megan was not asking to be protected anymore. She was asking to be armed with knowledge. If I do this, Nora said, if I mentor you through DIA training, you need to understand something. The work doesn't get easier. You don't build calluses against the moral injury. Every operation where you lie to someone who trusts you takes a piece of you, and you never get those pieces back. I know. Megan's eyes were steady. I'm still here. Nora nodded slowly. Then you have my support. But Megan, if at any point you decide this isn't the path you want, if the cost becomes too high, you walk away. No judgment, no shame. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Understood, ma'am. They finished their coffee talking about training schedules and security clearances and the logistics of transitioning into intelligence work. Professional conversation between two officers. But underneath it ran something more complex. Not quite forgiveness, not quite friendship, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The cycle continued. 3 months later, Nora stood in her Pentagon office reviewing the latest reform metrics from military training installations nationwide. The numbers kept trending positive. Abuse reports down across the board, retention rates climbing. The culture slowly, painfully shifting towards something that looked like accountability. Her desk phone rang. Colonel Callahan, you have a call from Fort Benning, Recruit Advocacy Office. They say it's urgent. Nora picked up. The voice on the other end was young, male, terrified. Ma'am, I'm Private Jennings. I'm calling about... I think something's wrong with my drill sergeant. The things he does aren't normal training. And I found something on his computer that I don't think I was supposed to see. Nora was already pulling up travel authorization forms on her screen. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. As the recruit talked, she touched the scar on her lip, the thin white line marking the moment her cover had shattered. The reminder that some people wore the uniform to protect and some wore it to prey. The work never finished. There would always be another Hale somewhere, another base that needed fixing, another recruit who needed someone willing to lie to expose the truth. But 400 soldiers at Fort Morrison slept safely tonight because one woman had been willing to become someone else. Megan Holloway was alive, commissioned, preparing to do the same work for the next generation. Command Sergeant Major Brennan's training protocols were spreading across the entire military. The math worked, even if success tasted like blood and lies, and the weight of trust betrayed in service of trust protected. Nora finished the travel orders, approved them with her signature, started packing her go bag. Fort Benning, another drill sergeant, another broken recruit who needed saving. The scar on her lip caught the fading sunlight as she worked, a thin white line that would never fully fade, marking the price she had paid, the price she would pay again, because some prices were worth paying, every single time.